Good afternoon, everybody. I am Dr. Annette Feravich here with episode number 2 on my series, Love and Sex in the 21st Century, on love and attachment. First of all, I'm going to be live every Sunday at 4 o'clock. And if you were here last week, or if you watched my video, what you know is we are trying to talk about love, and we're talking about what's going on today as far as our loving relationships go. Last week, what I did was I told you a little bit about what were the 4 greatest needs of a man and what were the 4 greatest needs of a woman. And so if you haven't seen that, it might be a really nice for you to go ahead and look at that. I had wished that I had known these needs long before I had gotten married, and I think that they're pretty valuable. Now, how does it answer the question for you, what is real love? Well, for me, I think of it this way. Are you willing to go into a relationship and do those things for another person? We're going to be talking about conflict and handling conflict a little bit later on. But the biggest advice I can give you is that you have to be willing to resolve the conflict. A lot of times, that's not a priority for people. A lot of times, a priority is to be right, to get my point across, or that you empathize with how I feel. But none of those things are going to occur if we don't agree to resolve the problem, to put everything that we have towards resolving that problem. And so, how does this relate to what is real love? Well, those people that we really love, we are willing to do those things for, to make them a priority. So look at those needs of a man and woman in my very first video and determine whether or not you feel like you are willing to do those things for another person. That's a really good first step. Okay. Now, I'll talk just a little bit about me. So I have been teaching in the area of social developmental and cognitive psychology for over 15 years. I got my degree in 2010 from Wayne State University. So you will be able to find me in the greater metropolitan Detroit area. My interest has always been in positive psychology. That's my area of expertise. The reason for that is because positive psychology emphasizes those healthy behaviors that get us to better places. And that's what I'm most interested in. We focus on healthy behaviors like respect, responsibility, justice, optimism, love. Those kinds of things take efforts in order to learn them. And so that's what we want to talk about a little bit about today. We're talking about love and attachment. And what we want you to know is that it takes real effort in order for us to find that real love and that real attachment. Okay, so here I have a quote from Erich Fromm. And Erich Fromm is a psychoanalytic theorist. He's from the 1930s, actually, was when his theories were real prominent. And he actually objected to a lot of Freudian theories. So you can look those theories up. People think that to love is simple, but that to find the right object to love or to be loved by, that is difficult. Okay, and the point that he was trying to make is this, that it takes effort. We fall in love really quite easily, right? And we know this because there's very often times where we fall in love with individuals who really aren't good for us. How does that happen? If we were to have made a list of all the qualities of people that we wanted to be in our lives, do they match the person that we're with? Do they match the person that we love? And that's an important thing to think about. We want to have a good idea of those qualities that we want in a person to love. However, if those qualities are not matching up with the person that we pick, then there really is a greater dysfunction in our ability to love in a healthy way. This series is not just talking about love in any love, nor is it talking about sex in just sex. What we're talking about are combining those two wonderful, beautiful things into a really healthy relationship. How can we do that? It's very interesting. I'm going to talk later on about how much we are unwilling to make an effort for love. That is a new trend in the 21st century. How much we are unwilling to make an effort for love. Okay, so let's just take a little bit closer look at what I wanted to talk about. First thing I want to do for this presentation is to remind you of some of the things that we had talked about last week. So if you're not sure about those 4 needs of a man and 4 needs of a woman, you want to go back to my video that I had, episode number 1. I will have the live presentation also live streaming through LinkedIn as well. Okay, all right. What I want to do now with you is I want to ask you a couple questions. And this kind of wraps up just a little bit about what we were talking about what is real love. How do you know you won't end up engaging in behaviors that foretell divorce? When we first get together with somebody and we want to get married and we're very much in love, we think our marriage is going to be the one that is successful. What we know about marriages, however, is that 1 in 2, approximately 50% of marriages are unsuccessful. They end up in divorce. But all of us believe that our marriages are not going to be the ones that end up in divorce. So what can we do to help us assure that our marriages will not end up in divorce? And I hope that some of you might be putting some of your answers in the chat, or I hope that some of you might just be thinking about some of these answers that you have. What do you think you could do to make sure that your marriage doesn't end up in divorce? Okay, well, the quickest answer is that your behaviors today, your issues today, are indicative of your problems and your issues tomorrow. So signs that your relationship is unhealthy, that you are not communicating with one another in respectful ways, that you're not being honorable to one another. Those are predictive of relationships tomorrow. You can't expect that if you have those issues in your relationship today, that those problems will get magically solved tomorrow. If there's abuse in your relationship today, there's going to be abuse in your relationship tomorrow. If there's abusive language today, there's going to be abusive language tomorrow. If you're with somebody who shows that they care about you today, they will show that they care about you tomorrow. Next question. How do you make the right decision? And here's the answer to that question. I'll let you think about it for a minute. How do you make the right decision? We just had a quote there from Erich Fromm, who said that very often it's difficult to find the right object to love. We think it's easy because we fall in love easily, but it's not so easy. That's what we're saying. Okay, so how is it that we can make the right decision? What helps us know that we're making the right decision? All right, well, do you like one another? And is that liking based on mutual respect? Okay, do you like one another, and is that based on mutual respect when you're around that person? Does that person make you feel special? Does that person have an interest in what you're saying? Does that person want to get to know you, right? Is that person willing also to be known? So does that person want to get to know you? And is that person willing to be known by you? Are you vulnerable with that person? Are you able to have fun and laugh with that person? Those are ways that that person makes you feel special. Do you feel attractive around that person? So how do you make the right decision? Does that person make you feel beautiful when you're around them? Do they tell you that you look good, right? And that goes for both men and for women, because both of us want to feel that we are attractive to our partners, right? Okay, do you feel passion? Because we have an epidemic of apathy. And what an epidemic of apathy means is that we see a great number of individuals who are not feeling those high, wonderful emotions. Many of them feel these low emotions, but not feeling those wonderful high emotions. And what we end up finding is that individuals then end up taking an easy way out. Instead of examining the things they need to examine, they take an easier way out, and that is, I want to feel better, and their doctor tells them, well, that's easy. All you need is an antidepressant. Now, we're going to talk about antidepressants as we go along. There's a lot of topics for us to talk about, not necessarily in this series, but we really want to pay attention to that when I'm talking about health in particular. Okay? But for now, feeling these highs and lows are part of being a human being. We've been told that these lows are not what we're supposed to be feeling, and that is simply not true. It's simply untrue that we shouldn't be feeling these lows. I just lost my partner of 35 years. His birthday is Wednesday. I feel like there's a part of me that shouldn't be feeling so great maybe right now in June about losing my partner, right? That's not a great feeling. And I don't need an antidepressant in order for me to not feel that. What I need to do is I need to allow myself to feel bad without going down a rabbit hole of depression and rumination. We're going to be taking control of our emotions so that we're not so afraid of the lows. If we don't experience the lows, we can't experience the highs. We have an epidemic of apathy going on in this country, so it's very apparent that we don't want to feel anything. Okay? All right. So, do you feel passion towards this person? Real passion. I'm going to tell you something. I don't see it in relationships. I do not see the passion in relationships. Now, I know people get very uncomfortable when we have public displays of affection, right? I know that makes people, and that's not what I'm talking about. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about hand-holding. I'm talking about the desire to reach out and touch somebody physically, right? To reach out and touch somebody physically, to touch their face, right? To touch their arm, to want to be close to that person. Is there passion in your relationship? Because we're going to talk about passion fading. Passion does fade in our long-term relationships. So what is it that we're supposed to be doing about that then if passions fade in those long-term relationships? What should we do? And finally, can you feel vulnerable without feeling guilty or embarrassed? Can you feel vulnerable? Do you feel playful, right? Do you feel passionate without feeling guilty about feeling passionate with that person? Do you feel like you can explain yourself and that person hears what you have to say without having to censor your words, right? It's not to say that we're not supposed to pick words carefully. We're making an effort towards our loving relationships, right? But are you censoring those things because you feel that that person's going to be upset by what you have to say? Okay, next question. Does passion fade? Now remember, what we're trying to talk about here is we're trying to find out what is real love. So we're moving from what is real love, and we're moving into this love and attachment. So, does passion fade? And what we find out is that individuals who are in healthy relationships actually still have a good, healthy sex life. How does that occur? When individuals are healthy friends. So go back to the questions that we were asking just on question number 2. Then you know whether or not you truly are good friends, and whether or not then you will continue to have a passionate life with one another. Okay? Next question that we want to ask. What about conflict? I said, yes, we can have conflict in our relationships. Should we have conflict in our relationships? Or are those relationships that are conflict-free, are those actually better relationships? And here's a couple things that I have learned about conflict in the relationship. So first of all, once again, the conflicts and the way that you handle conflicts today are predictive of the way that you're going to be handling conflicts tomorrow and for the rest of your life. So ladies in particular, if you feel that you're going to change a man in that area, help him become more communicative, right? Likely not. Likely not, okay? However, should healthy relationships have conflict? Of course, healthy relationships are going to have conflict. It's interesting, though, that there are kind of two almost world views that psychologists separate these mental representations. We're going to talk about that in a little bit more. Mental representations that we have of relationships. If we have mental representations of relationships where conflict is bad, right? And that it compromises my soulmate relationship. Okay? So one mental representation that we have of love is we have a soulmate. Okay? Do you have a soulmate? Did you marry your soulmate? One of the problems with having a soulmate is this, is that when there is conflict, what that says to soulmates is, uh-oh, maybe we got it wrong. Maybe we're really not soulmates, okay? The other type of mental representation of relationships is called a relationship growth mental representation. And what that means is this. When I am with a person, my perspective is that we will always have to work at our relationships. And so conflict in those relationships are an opportunity for growth, okay? So growth, mental representations versus soulmate representations. So we've got conflict, right? Does that conflict suggest you are not meant for each other, or does that conflict suggest that there's room for growth? All right, so it all depends on your perception of conflict, whether or not conflict is going to be beneficial. Also, this is interesting to me. I heard recently, and I heard this person, I can't even tell you who I heard it from, but they said it fervently, and that is, don't fight in front of your kids. We did. We did. It made our relationship and my relationship with my boys unhealthy. We did that. We argued in front of our kids. I wish that we hadn't, because number one, we weren't very good at arguing. And when our emotions arise inside of ourselves, we very often aren't able to think clearly and act in a disciplined, self-controlled kind of way. When emotions are high, cognitions are low. So, if you can handle your conflict without a lot of emotional arousal, good, that's great. But don't do it in front of the kids, because chances are we're going to make some mistakes, and we don't want to make those mistakes in front of the kids. So what we're talking about is we're talking about the differences between destructive conflict and constructive conflict. If the conflict is constructive, so that you're communicating in constructive ways, we'll talk more about handling conflict, then yes, by all means. Another good piece of advice for conflict is to schedule a time for that conflict. There are other ways, there are other strategies in order to approach somebody where you're feeling upset and apprehensive about approaching them. There are some really good strategies for approaching individuals in ways that won't get our emotions so elevated. Okay, so take a look at some of those strategies. We'll be talking about them, but right now we're just talking about what about marriages and what can we do to make sure that when we get into our marriages or our long-term relationships, that those are healthy and we continue to activate all kinds of healthy behaviors when we're in our relationships. Okay, the last question that I have here is there's a term that's called limerence. Limerence is sweeping us off of our feet. Shouldn't I be swept off of my feet? Isn't that a good idea for me to be swept off my feet? And well, the first thing to say about that is, who doesn't want to be swept off their feet, right? Of course we do. Of course we do. Interestingly enough, though, we can be swept off of our feet by all kinds of individuals. Remember what Fromm said. He said, falling in love is easy. That's the easy part, right? It's whether or not we picked a compatible partner, right? And what he said is this, that what that takes is work on our parts in order to be a person that somebody really relishes, right? That somebody really wants to love. That's the difficult part. So why are we so afraid that we're going to be losing the person that we love? Maybe it's because falling in love was so easy, but staying in love with me, actually isn't always so easy, right? So that's where the work is required. Okay. All right. So now what I'm going to do is we're going to start moving now into a little bit more about this topic, which is love and attachment. And relative to love and attachment, we know that typically there are just two old arguments that we've heard about over and over again. And the two old arguments have to do with nature and nurture. Nature and nurture. Okay. Now, I know that all of you are, pretty astute to the nature-nurture argument, I'm quite sure, right? But it's important to understand this relative to love and attachment. So when we're talking about nature versus nurture, when we're talking about nature, what we're talking about is we're talking about the biology. All right, so love. When I fall in love, is there particular biology? Now remember, some of us are assuming that, what I'm always talking about is intimate love, right? Love with an intimate partner. We call that eros love, right? Eros, Greek term for that kind of love. But there are other kinds of love as well. There's motherly love, right? The love that a mother has for her child, or that a child has for their mother or their parents, right? Which is different for fathers, and it's different for mothers. So the love that we have for our parents. We also have a brotherly love, right? A brotherly love. Now, let's talk about that for a minute relative to my nature versus nurture argument over here that I'm talking about. So, biology, are we biologically predisposed to have brotherly love? Are we biologically predisposed to attach to our mothers? Are we biologically predisposed to attach to somebody in more deep love? And when does that occur, right? If it's a biological basis, if there's a biological basis to this love, then maybe there's a reason why I don't feel it when I'm in third grade, but I do feel it as an adult, right? Okay? All right, so there's a biological factor to love. Also, the nurture factor, when we're talking about the nurture factor, the other argument would be that who we are and what we've become, how I know to love somebody, is due to my environment. All right, so that's the other argument. I fell in love with this person not because of the biology, right? Not because I am biologically drawn to that person, but because I have learned over time that is the person I'm supposed to be attracted to. Okay, we're going to talk about that a lot more. In fact, most of this discussion is on the environmental component and the importance of this environmental component. However, that is not to say that the biological component, the nature component, is not just as important. And as psychologists, then, what we do is we look at the interaction between those two things. So let's take a look at this just a little bit more closely. So you can see I've introduced a little rat there. And I introduced this little rat there, and if you can see what this rat is doing is, this rat is licking her little offspring. Okay, this is a characteristic or a behavior that mother rats or mice do for their little offspring. And this is no different than a caress or loving touch. What we have found actually in psychology through a number of different studies done starting with Harry Harlow in the 1950s. He did many studies on love, and this is very interesting because these were experimental designs that he did. You should look up Harry Harlow and the studies that he did on rhesus monkeys and on love. What he found was that this coincided, his information that he found, the data that he found, coincided with information that we found from Romanian orphans. You can go to Primetime, and in Primetime, ABC Primetime, there's a video out there that you can look at about the Romanian orphans and how they came about. What ended up happening was in Romania, there was such an influx of unwanted children, and because of government regulation. And so these children were put in orphanages. Well, the orphanages were overflowing, and they really didn't get their basic needs met, including a basic need for physical touch. And many of those children died because of the lack of touch. Also, if you're at all aware of that many individuals in the United States wanted to adopt these Romanian orphans because they had so many of them. So many people in the United States adopted Romanian orphans, brought them here to the United States, and because they did not have the nurturing value of human touch, they were unable to regulate their emotions and cognitions in appropriate ways. You can see that in the ABC Primetime video if you want a little bit more information about it. But it goes to show you the drastic need for us to have an environment that is nurturing. All right, moving on. And what this does then is we find that there is an interaction, that both the DNA of these mice and rats change, a biological event going on there, that their DNA changes based on the amount of licking or no licking that the mother rat did. And so that literally changed the DNA for the offspring. Those mothers who were actually bred to be non-lickers had offspring that had higher levels of adrenal dysfunction. Adrenal dysfunction is our fight or flight mechanism, and this became dysfunctional in rats that had mothers who were non-lickers. So here we see biology, the adrenal glands, and our reaction to stress is changed based on the environment, the nurturing or non-nurturing environment that these rats were in. All right. Now, what that led to is it led to some other scientific studies done by Limerence, Conrad Limerence, and what he called imprinting. And this is an example of imprinting that we see here. Here is Limerence, and what Limerence did was he found that offspring of geese or ducklings would follow the very first thing they saw after hatching. Now, there's some caveats to it. That's not the straight long and short of that study, okay? That's not the final conclusion of that study. Nevertheless, what's important about that study is that they found a biological basis for attaching to mothers. All right, so this goes back to our last slide. What we are finding is that there is a biological as well as an environmental basis for attachment. And what this was studied by a gentleman whose name was John Bowlby. And John Bowlby took the concept of Limerence's imprinting and took it a step further to suggest that what we needed to attach to our caregivers was both a biological basis for the attachment. So why is the attachment between child and mother so strong? And we don't see that same kind of strength and attachment for child and fathers? Because there's a biological basis for it. So suggesting that infants attach to all caregivers in the same way simply is untrue. It would be nice if infants did attach to caregivers in the same way, but they don't. Nevertheless, what Harry Harlow did find out is that infants don't have to have a mother or caregiver to still develop strong attachments. It's still biologically different for the mother and the infant, but it is not necessary for an infant to attach. So that's really good information, because if an infant loses a mother, then it would be hopeless for that infant to be able to attach. This picture that I have up here for you, I'll expand it for you, is a picture of Mary Ainsworth's strange situation. This is how psychologists measure attachment. And if I were you, I'd go to the YouTube video there. There's a slide from it, the YouTube video, and it's called The Strange Situation. And Mary Ainsworth devised this measure of attachment. And go there and see. Do you think that this is a quality measure of attachment? I would be interested to find out. Now, what they do is they are looking at an infant's reaction when a mother leaves the room and the infant's reaction when the mother returns to the room. And what they find when they take a look at those reactions is Ainsworth labeled these as 4 different types of attachment classifications. Now, there are some variations of these theories depending on the theorist. I like this theory the best, that gives you 4 different classifications. Some theories give you 3 different classifications. Okay? All right, so the first classification then is secure attachment. And so what do we find when infants are securely attached? What we find is that exactly what you would expect. That when a mother leaves the room, the infant is upset. And when the mother returns to the room, the infant is easily comforted. If you want to see that in video form, make sure you go and see that Mary Ainsworth video. All right. That defines or is evidence of a secure attachment. How many infants are securely attached to their mothers or caregivers? Approximately 60 to 65%. So that's really good news, right? That's really good news that the majority of individuals are securely attached to their caregivers. Now, they've looked at this. Of course, we've been able to measure this. They started taking a look at infant attachment in the 1960s and 70s. And so there's a lot of information that we do have regarding infant attachment. And also, other measures about whether or not attachment has changed over time. So keep your eyeballs looking for that, the changes in attachment, because that really says that there's something changing in our environment. Right now, from the studies, we are not seeing a lot of fluctuation today in attachment, but I would be really interested to see if we don't see, maybe in the last few years, in the next 5 years or so, if we don't see some of those numbers change a little bit based on our willingness to get emotionally attached to other people. Okay, all right, so that is the first classification, secure attachment. The second classification is insecure avoidant attachment. Now, the rest of these are all insecure attachments, and they've categorized these insecure attachments in 3 different ways. All right, so insecure avoidant. Remember, what we're doing is we are measuring the infant's reaction when a mother leaves the room, as well as when a mother returns to the room. For an insecure avoidant attachment, what we see is that this infant is not bothered by the mother leaving the room. This infant is not bothered by the mother's absence. But when the mother returns, the infant is very clearly upset. It shows great distress upon the mother's return. Now, what you want to do is you want to start thinking about, what kind of parents are we talking about? What kind of parents are we talking about? Okay, all right, so if I'm a parent and my child is not upset when I leave the room, but is upset when I return, what kind of parent do you suppose that I might be? About 20% of infants are insecure avoidantly attached. Okay, so an insecure avoidant attachment. All right, next slide. So the next insecure attachment that we have is insecure resistant. Remember what I said. Try and think about different parenting styles that might contribute to this type of behavior. So a child who is insecure resistant in their attachment, they show distress when the mother leaves. However, this infant shows inconsistent behaviors when the mother returns. So, very often, great distress when the mother leaves the room. However, when the mother returns, the infant shows inconsistent behaviors. Sometimes the infant ignores the mother. Sometimes the infant is clingy to the mother. Okay. Sometimes the infant is excited. Sometimes the infant is not interested. All right. That's an insecure, resistant relationship or attachment with the caregiver. You can see that this is a resistance to getting attached, is what this is. All right. And about 10 to 15% of children get insecure, resistant attachments. Okay, and then the last one, number 4, is insecure, disorganized. Insecure, disorganized, these infants can behave in numerous ways when the mother leaves. So it could be a temper tantrum, it could be great sadness, it could be not bothered, not disturbed, it could be angry when the mother leaves, okay? So many numerous behaviors when the mother leaves. However, when the mother returns, the infant engages in what is called freezing behaviors. And these are real, true behaviors. We've seen freezing behaviors in mice. We actually had a mouse trap go off in my house when I was a little girl, and the mouse was never caught in the mouse trap. However, the mouse was frozen from the fear right next to the mouse trap and was dead, frozen with fear when the mouse trap went off. Those are freezing behaviors. Those are very fearful behaviors, and freezing behaviors we find in infants or young children who have been abused. Why does this child not know how to react when the mother leaves? Because the child just doesn't know how to act. All behaviors for this child are up for grabs. They are unsure of all of their behaviors. Approximately 5% of infants are insecure, disorganized in their attachment style. Okay, so those are the 4 different attachment styles. And now let's take a look at the parenting styles. What I asked you to do is I asked you to think about the types of parents that might teach, environment, nurture these types of reactions in their child. What kind of parent might stimulate or activate these kinds of reactions in their child? So let's take a look at different parenting styles that we have. All right, so parenting styles here. What we are looking at are 2 continuums. There are 2 different continuums, and on this continuum, one continuum is a control. So how much control does a parent assert over their child? Lots of control, making sure that you don't ever step out of line, or no control. Remember, we're looking at 2 ends of a continuum. People are in between usually, but we need to identify the extremes of the continuum. So here in this case, the extremes of the continuum are restrictive and demanding, very controlling behaviors, or uncontrolling behaviors, very permissive and undemanding. All right, and then the other continuum that we have here is we have a continuum which is called emotionality. And again, we are looking at 2 ends of a continuum, right? 2 extremes of that continuum. And those 2 extremes are warm and responsive. So how emotionally responsive are we to our children? Remember, they are developing attachment styles over time. So we're talking about children right now. We're not talking about adult attachments, but we will talk about those in just a minute. All right, so here we have got 4 different attachment styles that develop in our children depending on how their parenting styles affect them, or based on their parenting styles. So here now, very easy to take a look at this. When we have an authoritative parent, what we have is we have a parent who is warm and responsive, but also restrictive and demanding in their control. An authoritative parent expects that their child, for example, has chores to do, that they have responsibilities in the home, and this is good for a child. So in particular for children, children do need strict parameters. A lot of times parents don't want to take the responsibility of disciplining their child. A lot of times parents would prefer to be friends with their child, and that's actually what we see more nowadays, is that parents are taking the role of friends. But a real authoritative parent who ends up having secure attachments with their children are parents who actually have rules. We know from studies in IO psychology, industrial organizational psychology, and that psychology is psychology that actually emphasizes what are good psychological strategies to use in businesses. What we find is that individuals in business who are just recently hired need a boss who takes more control over their daily schedule. They need a boss who is giving them rules and guidelines. That's no different than our young children needing this restrictive or demanding types of control. Again, if I'm being warm and responsive to my child, then I can also lay down rules and have expected or appropriate consequences when those rules are broken. Let's take a look at an authoritarian parent. An authoritarian parent, it emotionally is rejecting and unresponsive, and also very controlling as well. That's an authoritarian parent. What kind of attachment do you think that an authoritarian parent might instigate? Okay, now this parent is not warm. This parent is cold. This parent is a disciplinarian. And that's it, right? They discipline, but they do not give that child the warm responsiveness that they need, that child needs. And very often, relative to punishment, relative to being disciplined, again, they take a great role in controlling, which often means that that parent can go overboard in disciplining that child. So not appropriate responses because they are unloving, unresponsive to that child. Okay, two more quickly. Permissive parents. They are warm and responsive. However, they are undemanding of their child. And this parent then ends up wanting to be their child's friend. What's the problem with that? What's the problem with that? Very often what you end up with is you end up with a child who is insecure, resistant. Insecure, resistant. Why? Why would a parent who is their friend, right, who's permissive and warm with them, why would I have an insecure, resistant attachment with that parent-child relationship? Because that parent actually isn't there often enough for that child. Because that parent is permissive, they allow that child no rules or no regulations. And that parent is not there. That child has difficulty trusting that that parent will lead and guide that child appropriately. So what is the emotional reaction of that child? One of, it could be one way or it could be another way. These are the beginnings of neurotic behavior, unstable emotions. Why is that child insecure, resistant? Because the parent's behaviors are unstable. And unstable emotional behaviors and unstable guidance from a parent leaves a child also feeling neurotic. And then the last one here, because we can see these map on really quite nicely to the 4 different attachment styles, is an uninvolved parent. This is a parent who is both rejecting and unresponsive and permissive and demanding. And this parent, although it does not map perfectly on with the insecure, disorganized, this parent is neglectful of that child. And then just depending on how much that they are demanding of that child is going to depend on whether or not that child is fearful, right? So authoritarian parent as opposed to a parent who is uninvolved. So what ends up happening is that when we have developed these attachment styles as infants, what it does is it develops and activates what we call in psychology mental representations of our relationships. These mental representations then guide our expectations for future relationships. Okay? They guide our expectations for future relationships. So if I have a mental representation of what a mother is supposed to be, and that mental representation of a mother is somebody who is warm and loving, a mother who volunteers her time for people who are less fortunate, right? A mother who works and brings home and supports. That might be the expectation of a mother, right? If a mother doesn't work, my expectation might be that that mother is a lazy mother if they're a stay-at-home mother. We're not saying that one is a better mother than another. What we're saying is that from infancy, we end up developing these mental representations of what we believe mothers are. And then those mental or fathers, right? Or fathers. We have mental representations that fathers, for me, like I said in last week's video, were the disciplinarians, right? Not the mothers. The mothers were nurturing. And that was my expectation for what a family looks like. So, what is key here is that these attachment relationships give the foundation for our mental representations of a mother, of a father, of a family, of relationships. And this then becomes reasons why we pick people who are loving and empathetic, who are domineering and authoritarian, who are uninvolved and careless, who are neglectful, who are stern, who are. That's how we pick those mates for us. And so research has been done then in adult attachment styles. And research that's been done in adult attachment styles take a look at statements. And what they do is they look at these statements and then you tell me, do these statements reflect what you believe relationships look like? So let's take a look at the first statement here. It is easy for me to become emotionally close to others. I am comfortable depending on others and having others depend on me. I don't worry about being alone or having others not accept me. Does that statement reflect what you feel about relationships? Is that an accurate statement of relationships for you? Number 2, I am comfortable without close emotional relationships. It is very important for me to feel independent and self-sufficient, and I prefer not to depend on others or have others depend on me. Does that statement reflect how you feel about relationships? Is that your mental representation of relationships? Let's take a look at the next one. I want to be completely emotionally intimate with others, but I often find that others are reluctant to get as close as I would like. I am uncomfortable being without close relationships, but I sometimes worry that others don't value me as much as I value them. Does that express how you feel about close, intimate relationships? Is that your mental representation of relationships? And then finally, I am uncomfortable getting close to others. I want emotionally close relationships, but I find it difficult to trust others completely or to depend on them. I worry that I will be hurt if I allow myself to become too close to others. Is that your mental representation of relationships? And what we end up with then is we end up with adult attachment styles. And here is a grid that shows you the different types of adult attachment styles. And so you can see how we end up getting these from our childhood mental representations. Here we have, once again, 2 continuums. One continuum focuses on anxiety. So, do we have anxiety related to attachment? And then the continuum ranges from high to low. Of course, once again, we are taking a look at extremes. We want to look at extremes. That helps us see the 2 different ends of the continuum. Many times people are in gray areas, but it helps us give us a boundary for these types of attachment styles. All right, so that's one continuum, anxiety. The second continuum that we look at is avoidance. And then individuals rate themselves as high or low on avoidance. So, do you have anxiety regarding a relationship, high or low? And do you tend to avoid relationships, high avoidance, low avoidance? And what we end up with is we end up with adult attachment styles, okay? Here are the 4 different adult attachment styles. You can take a look at these in your own time. Stop the video and take a look at these. You can see I'm a little bit over time here, but I want to wrap up this topic on love and attachment. So you can see here when an individual feels high anxiety but low avoidance, high anxiety but low avoidance in a relationship. So this is a person who gets with somebody and they're like, ooh, why don't they call me? I don't understand why they're not calling me. Oh, do you think he likes me? I don't know. What do you think he's thinking right now? I'm not sure. Is he thinking that I wonder if he likes me as much as I like him. High anxiety, but I'm always in a relationship. This person is clingy, right? We know this person as clingy. Here we have a relationship with low anxiety, low avoidance. I don't mind getting in relationships, and when I do get in relationships, I'm fine. I don't avoid them. I don't feel anxiety. That's a securely attached adult. What we end up seeing are pretty much the same percentages for infant attachment that we see for adult attachment. So that's very interesting. That gives evidence for both of those measurements for infant and adult attachment. The next one here we have is fearful, high anxiety, high avoidance. So these individuals, they don't get involved in relationships. They stay out of them. These are individuals who cannot commit. Why? Because relationships give them great anxiety, fearful. And then the last one there is dismissing. And individuals who have adult attachment styles that are dismissing are low in anxiety and high in avoidance. They don't care about being in a relationship and doesn't give them anxiety at all. They simply have no emotional needs, and neither should you. Dismissing. I have no emotional needs, low anxiety, and neither should you. High avoidance. Okay, all right, now let's take a look at the actual measure, shall we? So here we've got our 4 different descriptions, and you decided which one you fit in with best, your 4 different descriptions, and from Bartholomew and Horowitz in 1991, here are your attachment styles. So depending on how you described your intimate relationships, you can see then that these equate to the different attachment styles, which equate to your position on or feelings regarding anxiety in relationships and whether or not you have a behavior-wise, you have a tendency to avoid relationships. Before I end this, I want to talk a little bit about strategies. And what strategies then should we use when we want to have healthy attachment relationships? The very first question that people likely are going to ask is, what happens if I had an insecure relationship as a child? What happens if I was insecurely attached to my mother, my caregiver? Well, the biggest thing here is you've got information. That's the biggest thing. And so now what you do is you examine those kinds of behaviors that contribute to those different attachment styles. So when we're taking a look at these 2 old arguments and what contributes to the healthy development of our offspring, we know that there's a biological component. There was a study that was done where they stressed rats and they sprayed citronella. It's like a Pavlov's dog kind of experiment, right? Put food in front of you, the dog, ring the bell, salivates, ring the bell, the dog salivates without food. It's a Pavlov dog kind of study that they were doing. So stressing rats and spraying citronella. Adrenal glands activated, that's our stress hormone. Cortisol is our stress hormone. That's what's released by our adrenal glands, and we feel this stress. What they found was that 2 and 3 generations later, they would spray citronella on the offspring of these rats, and it would activate stress. Simply spraying citronella activated stress in the offspring 2 and 3 generations later. So we really need to be cognizant of whether or not we are individuals who are loving individuals, who make it easy for us to be loved. That's what we want to look at, because it not only affects our current attachment, you can see how this then can affect generations later our reactions to stress and anxiety. So, can we correct these things? Yes, we can, by providing a nurturing environment. Remember what I said in last week's video. What we want to do is we want to make sure that we are here for our children. And for a secure attachment, we need to be there in body, mind, and spirit for our children, right? Those mothers who are sometimes there and sometimes not because they're depressed or neurotic or emotionally unstable, and that goes for fathers as well. Not to the same degree we see in attachment, but still goes for those fathers as well, just like we said last week on Father's Day, that you need to be there present for those children. And they know that you are. They can tell that you are. They react to you. If you are distracted because your boyfriend or girlfriend or loved one did this to you, if you are constantly ruminating about your depressive states, your children are going to have difficulty attaching. Strategy for adults then. Let's say that I am an adult who was insecurely attached, and I answered those questions regarding my avoidance or anxiety to relationships. That's something that you want to think about then. Who are you picking for relationships, right? And what's the kind of person that you're providing to that intimate other? Those are the things that you want to think about. Okay, so we'll talk a little bit more. That's the one strategy that I wanted to leave you with, was making sure that you are available. Second strategy I'll leave you with is this: not only to be available, because remember, it's not just about being a warm parent, but the second thing is that you have to not be afraid to give guidelines, rules, parameters for your children. You're the adult in the relationship. Your child looks to you for answers. It's how we develop trust in our relationships with our offspring. If you are not taking an adult position, a parenting position, that child is going to have a very difficult time trusting you. And that affects all other mental representations of our relationships. So what are the two things that I can give you to develop a secure relationship? Make sure that you are warm and emotionally present for your children. And secondly, make sure that you are not afraid to give your children some parameters, some guidelines, some good advice. You're the parent. You should know these things. And if you feel like you don't, if you feel like you're unsure about parenting, there are lots of wonderful resources. Please contact me for some resources on some good parenting skills. You can email me at Dr. Feravich, Dr. period, F as in Frank, E-R-A, V as in Victor, I-C-H, Dr. Feravich at healthymindbodyspirit.net. You can also visit me, like I said, on my website, www.healthymindbodyspirit.net. And I have many educational videos out there, and I'm adding to them all the time, every week. Right now, don't miss my series that I still have on my website on self-esteem. That will give you some good guidelines about how to really boost some self-worth that is not going to crumble in your child when they are faced with conflict. All right. So if you haven't seen my very first video, you can go out to YouTube and do a search for Dr. Annette Feravich. You can also more easily find my videos on my website, www.healthymindbodyspirit.net. There, you can see under educational videos here, that's where you can find my videos, and you can find episode number 1 in this series if you're looking for it. You can also find things such as Shop Shackley. So we have a sale that's going on right now. So if you go out to my website, you will find that there is 40% off of specially selected immunity products. Buy 3 products and you get 40% off all 3 of those products, those immunity products. You can find those under Shop Shackley on my website
for you.
Now, I'm doing a little tease, and I'm not sure about this tease, but I'm going to try and continue this tease. And so the tease that I have for you to kind of watch is to see what is the question that I'm going to ask. Last week, if you didn't see, I had a question for Dr. Fauci. I will be following up on some of these questions as well. I haven't heard from him yet, but I'll let you know if I do. But whether or not, I'm going to be following up on why I asked that question and what are some of the answers that might be to that question. That's a health question I'm going to get to a little bit later on. But here's a question that I have for Bill Maher. Bill Maher, you had a wonderful video where you interviewed Megyn Kelly on why she withdrew her children from private school. I loved that video. I'm going to be talking more about that topic in the weeks to come in this series. You also said in one of your last real times that how fed up you are with California. And in particular, I want to make this known that Bill Maher was stating about how much regulation Californians have to bear. Yet, when it comes to water, there is really relatively little regulation as to how they decide where the water goes. 80%, I'm not sure if I'm getting this right, Bill Maher, hopefully you'll watch my video and you'll let me know. 80% of the water that Californians use are going towards almonds. Bill Maher said he's getting fed up with California. My question is, Michigan is a beautiful state. Do you want to move to Michigan? That's my question. I don't know. We'll see. Okay, that's all that I have for you. Thank you for joining me. Next episode number 3 is what is love and what's different today? And so I hope I see you and have a wonderful July 4th weekend. And I hope I will see you back here at 4 o'clock on Sunday.